We all want to be happier, but how do we get there? First, we start by realizing happiness is not a destination. Being happy consists of micro action steps every single day. I'm your host, Brittany King, and I'm here to guide you along the way. Hello, my beautiful friends, and welcome back to the Positively Real podcast. How are we doing? We are celebrating May as Mental Health Awareness Month, which I say this every year, but we don't need a month to celebrate. I'm glad there is a month, but specifically, like, this is something that we need to be having conversations about every single day, every month of the year. But for this month in particular, I wanted to have conversations that aren't always had around mental health awareness. So when I was planning this podcast for today, the first person that popped into my mind was Natalie from Sunday Mournings. So Natalie's purpose, and I when I see people like that are living in alignment with their purpose and taking the pain they've experienced from the past and bringing it into their purpose, that's how you know that they're living in alignment. But Natalie's purpose is to change the cultural messaging around our grief-avoidant reality. And that really resonated deeply within myself, because I will be the first to say that before I experienced grief that was so close to me, I was definitely a grief avoidant person, because it was so painful, because I didn't know how to handle conversations, or I didn't know how to hold space, because I was so uncomfortable within myself, because I was so unfamiliar with difficult emotions. I never knew this world of sadness, because I would always suppress it, or grief or pain. I experienced it, but I didn't know. And so as an adult, I was definitely grief avoidant until I started experiencing loss, and it opened me up to a whole different side of myself. And I'm so grateful for that. So Natalie, welcome to the show.
Oh my gosh. Thank you for the intro of a lifetime. And I'm
You're
so
welcome.
excited to be here. I have just loved following along your journey. And I believe you're someone who just lives so beautifully in alignment as well, too. And so it was like a hell yes when you reached out. And I just feel honored to have this conversation with you.
I was so excited when you said yes. I was like, I have this idea. And you were like, yes. I was like, okay, done. Let's do it. But why don't you give a little background on who you are, what you're doing, and why you're doing it?
Yeah, so my name's Natalie Orozco-Moxley, and I'm the founder of Sunday Mournings. I sort of typically share, right? So what is Sunday Mournings? It's spelled Mourn for starters, to really just amplify that voice from the start, from the get-go, play on words a little bit, if you will. And I always share that my grief story really started when I was 15. But if I'm really honest, and like we're all for honesty, right? So we're gonna get all the honesty
Oh,
in
we
this
are.
conversation, but it really started when I was about 4. I lost my father to addiction, but I think, just like you said, we're sort of fed this narrative of that's not grief, or what is grief? How is it too young? When are you too young to grieve or understand? But that ended up losing my entire family by the age of 23. And so there's lots of different reasons sort of within that, and we can dive into that further. But I always sort of share of like, I wanted to be that. I wanted to be the messaging that I couldn't find when I was younger. And in a grief avoidant world, especially sort of when losing my mother at the age of 15, I wanted to be the person that I so desperately was trying to find, that gave those honest answers, and not the platitudes of time heals all wounds and they're in a
Everything
better
happens
place.
for a reason.
Yeah, and all of those things. And so I really started early, and I started volunteering for Hospice of the Valley and working for Hospice of the Valley, and sort of snowballed into a lot of my own rituals and things that I really wanted to share. And so my mission is really to help cultivate conversations and be that person to help bridge that gap when you don't know what to say, and doing that through some heartfelt gifting as well too. And so my mission with Sunday Mournings is really to breathe life back into that pain, because there can be life within it, to meet that love within that loss, and remind our love of its home, which is like in our hearts, because there is so much love within grief too that I think is really easy to forget. So
Oh, it's so
yeah.
beautiful. I definitely want to dive into your story and how you navigated grief at such a young age, and then being able to transform that pain and I'm sure confusion and anger and all the things that came along with it into something that's so beautiful to facilitate these conversations. And I'm just so grateful that you are facilitating these conversations and being that voice, because it like this is it's not easy. This
Yeah,
stuff is hard. I think our as human beings, we naturally stay away from it. We don't want to touch it. It's like it's too
totally.
much. It's too painful, right? It's like we need to look on the bright side. And like I'm all about the bright side, but it's within acknowledging the pain that you do find the beauty. And I found through my own grief that love, like the bigger the love, the bigger the grief. And so when you experience grief on that level, it's like that's just such a gift that you could love that deeply.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it
So
is. It's
let's
like a,
oh, go ahead.
oh no, I was just gonna say it's just a beautiful mirror back to the love that you have, not only for whatever that grief may be, because we'll also dabble into, I think people associate grief with death, but there is
Mhm.
so many layers that run deep. And so it can be a really beautiful mirror back of also just like a celebration of yourself and all the journey that got you here. So
So good.
yeah.
We're definitely going to circle back to that because I do want to talk about the different types of grief, because I do
Mhm.
think that people mostly associate it with death and loss, which I think is a huge part of grief. But I found in my own journey, like grieving my past self, especially becoming a mom, I've had to grieve my past self so many different times. And it
Yes.
is just like, it is very painful. It
Yes.
is not easy to do. And it's also very like, it's very like secretive. It feels like
Yeah.
it's not very much talked about.
It's a little bit abstract too, right? Like I've
Hmm.
been listening to a lot of Cleo Wade, and she's one of my biggest inspirations of just leading with love in so many different avenues. And sort of talking about when you like sort of surrender, when you sort of go into grieving that version of yourself, it is abstract. It's like, what does that mean to even
Right.
grieve myself, right?
Right.
And so I'm with you and right along with you, honestly, in it as we speak of grieving a version of myself as well too. So.
Yeah. So we'll definitely touch on that. But I do want to go to your story and navigating losing your mom at the age of 15 and
Mhm.
then losing your entire family at the age of 23. Tell me, walk me through that journey and how this all started.
Ooh, are you ready? Because
I'm buckled up. I'm here for the
yeah,
hard conversation. I
I'm
mean,
like,
we're gonna like,
yeah,
well, this conversation is really about grief and mental health, and like I'm excited for listeners to really like sit with
totally.
their own discomfort in this,
Yeah,
so we can
yeah.
really touch upon like this connection with our mental and emotional well-being.
Totally. And I'll start by saying, like, there's two things that I really found within grief. One is you get this story that you almost rehearse. It's a story that, like, you're used to telling those people when you all of a sudden be met with that really uncomfortable eye contact, whether it be, in passing or at a party or dinner or whatnot. And then there's also, like, I think the real story that also brings up sometimes those emotions. And so I'm here to tell the real story for you all because I think
Mhm.
it's really important. I've found so much healing through storytelling, and so I'm really honored to share this with you and sort of your community. And so, starting from the top, I would say having a family that struggles with addiction. I think, like I said, I learned grief pretty young. I just didn't realize what it was. I sort of would put a lot of jokes to it or wanted to protect my mother because I think there's also that narrative of she was grieving what she thought would be this beautiful family and then wanting to protect her. And so I became this protector. I became this be small, stay small, say the things that people need you to say and just sort of self-abandon yourself in the process. So
Mhm.
I was already really not the best at expressing my needs within that. And then my mom first got cancer when I was 7. So my mother was blonde hair, green eyes, very fair skinned, and it started as melanoma, so as skin cancer. And she grew up in California, so she was that sun beach babe, being in the sun so much. And then back when I was 15, we actually didn't know. So my mom started getting all of these migraines really suddenly. She ended up fainting at work. So that was, March of 2017. And then by September of that same year, she had died. So it was very sudden. It was very quick. My life changed literally overnight within that. and it was brain and breast cancer. So the skin cancer had metastasized to brain cancer. So imagine you're 15, right? Life is already, talk about mental health. Life is already
Mhm.
so hard at 15.
Mhm.
And you're in this waiting room and here, yeah, it's actually stage 4 and we're sorry, but you're not going to make it.
Mm.
And how you sit with that of also wanting to be, right, that protector, that person that is the save the day energy for my mother and have her feel that she can rely on me, but also meaning, what does that mean for me? I don't have a dad. Like,
Mhm.
do I get in the foster system? Like, what does that
Mhm.
look for me? So sort of fast forwarding into that story, every 2 years, I just started continuing to lose multiple family members. It was like this, it was almost like my body was already anticipatory into that grief of like,
Mhm.
okay, it's been that marker. What's going to drop now? What's going to happen
Mhm.
now? And so all like sort of the PTSD and trauma started to come into play of like, I never felt like I could take a deep breath. So when I say uncles, grandparents, I was an only child. So literally everyone for just a variety of different reasons were dying. And I also was sort of thinking of like, why me? Like, why me? A, period, that this is to happen. B, why am I the survivor? What is that? What am I meant to do with this? I'm so young. I'm
Mhm.
selling a house, I'm selling cars, I'm holding real estate,
Mhm.
sales for all of my family's belongings. What do I take? What do I keep? I'm too young. Like, who do I ask these
Mhm.
questions to? And so I
Mhm.
really had to come into myself really young, which now is sort of catching up to me into my 30s, that I didn't know how to play. I missed a lot of that childhood, and that's sort of what I'm leaning into now. But so the long and the short of it is primarily cancer, addiction, and sort of just a strange relationship sort of within that,
Mhm.
and just variety of different things. But that's how we got to where I am today, and why I have so much understanding that life is like not promised, and not in a way that's doom and gloom, but I've just really seen it and experienced it firsthand.
Yeah. Wow. What a story. And to be so young to have those experiences. And then that question, why me? And looking at where this has guided you into creating Sunday mornings and this platform to facilitate these types of conversations. Like, wow, it's powerful. And something that I see, it's like we come into this world and it's almost like we have this agreement before, we're like, yes, this is the path that I'm going to choose. And then we forget it. And then we go through life as the human experience. And then these things happen. And it's like happening and you finding the lessons in it and being able to turn it into something so beautiful like Sunday mornings just shows that you're like listening. You're like, this is why
Yeah.
I'm here. Like this terrible, painful thing that I experienced that you would think that no young person should experience in their lifetime, but you did. And now you're on this side of it, facilitating these conversations. So it's just a beautiful thing.
Thank you. Yeah, I just really had this like, I think a lot of my life, I really tried to make my mom's life worth it. I think that she
Mhm.
had been through so much, and sort of caveat onto that is my father, we were in an abusive relationship with herself and my father, and myself and my father. And I really just wanted to make everything we went through, like, be able to look up to her and be like, we did it. Like, we
Yeah.
made it through everything. And so it was really just a lot of my inspiration. And I sort of became, to be honest, a little bit obsessed with like, how do I make this worth it? How to make it worth it? Became into perfectionism and doing the most and working 3 jobs since I was in high school, just like, okay, we're going to grind it out. When really I found a lot of that release in that space within giving myself space and honoring her in other ways. Like even my last name, why I go by Orozco-Moxley, is to honor her and my mother's side of the family within the last name, because Orozco is my father's last name and Moxley is my mother's. It's those little things that like every day, just the beautiful reminder of like, no, I'm not actually making something of her life. I'm making something of mine.
Mhm.
So that's
Mhm.
what I really just want to help support people through with Sunday mornings. And it's like, it's my soul work. Like, it's
Yeah.
not
Oh,
just,
that's what I'm saying. Your soul
a
came here with this
business.
mission. You're like,
Yes.
this is what I signed up for. And it is. And it
Yeah.
just shows through your content. That's what really stood out to me, which is why when I was planning for a podcast, I was like, it was just, I was on a walk and I was like, I need to talk
Mm,
to Natalie about this because it's something that we really don't talk about
yeah.
enough. And what better person than you that has like, had this experience from a very early age and now are supporting other people through this as well. So, I want to talk about grief and the connection to mental health, but I also want to ask you the question about why you think we live in such a grief avoidant reality.
It's such a good question because I sit with this one and I bring it back up to myself a lot because I feel like it changes and sort of adapts within it and it comes through waves just like with grief. But I think it's because the root like cause of it is because it's uncomfortable. And people like sitting in that comfort, it's so much easier to be angry than it is to be sad. Sometimes,
Mhm.
right? Not always. It's so much easier to then just be like, okay, I'm going to brush it off. Like you said, I'm going to be happy. I'm going to look at the bright side. I'm going to look at all these things. I'm going to solve it. That's another thing I think I see often is like, okay, how do I make this like the ultimate math
Mm,
equation to solve when it's just not
mhm,
that? It's
mm,
just sitting within it with someone. And that takes courage. It takes strength on both parties' sides. It takes really honest, awkward, uncomfortable conversations. And so that's why I think, we're really just learning how to have those, period, let alone when it comes to something that can be as traumatic as grief or
mhm,
life-changing as grief too. So,
mm. I'm so glad that you brought that up. I think it's human beings' just natural resistance to sitting in the uncomfortable, but I definitely fall into the umbrella of how do I fix it? And I still,
yeah.
even with understanding all of this, I still default to that. There's been a lot of loss in people very close to me in my life recently, and like it's almost just like a default for
Yeah.
me of how can I fix it? And I think because I grew up as a fixer
Hmm.
and we always was trying to solve problems, and with grief and loss, whether that's like death or the loss of a job or a relationship, there isn't anything to fix because it's not broken. It's just something that happened.
Yeah. It's an experience,
It's an
right?
experience. And that's what
Yeah.
life is. Life is
Yeah.
experiential. And we forget that. And I have to constantly remind myself of like, and I have to like catch myself because, and then I think about the other person and I know how I've been on the receiving end of someone trying to fix it. And like, it makes me want to push them further away. I'm like,
Hmm.
not broken. But then I'm on the other side being like, what can I do to make this better? Like, how can I take
Totally.
away this pain from you? Because it hurts me to see you in this way.
And
Um,
And
so,
people just
oh,
want to do things, right? And
right.
that's what I say is like a lot of times when saying like what can I do for you? Like, I think it comes with best intentions of like let me know if you need anything. What I really just invite as an invitation for everyone is instead like pick things. Say, I'd
Mhm.
love to drop off X or X at your house. What's the best time to do that? If it doesn't feel like a good time, like give things that you can do. Can I come do your laundry for you? Can I pick up your kids from school? Like, I think when you're so
Mm,
deep in it, speaking for myself, I didn't even know the start of what I needed. I was like, I need a friend, but I don't even know what a friend looks like for me right now. So,
totally. And I can't
yeah.
wait to get into that a little bit more with like tangible stuff because that's something I've noticed even with like friends that have had babies. Like, what do you need? Like, I remember right after I had Ellie, I was like, I don't know. I was like,
Yeah.
hormones. I need a hormonal balance and not the night sweats. Like,
Yes.
so I love that you brought that up and I can't wait to get into that a little bit more because yeah, I think we don't know. We literally don't know because we are so grief avoidant and discomfort avoidant that we can't even like sit and ask ourselves those questions
Yeah.
of, oh, okay, I wouldn't want that. Okay, let me just like, I'm going to drop this off. Let me know if this is a good time. Let me do, I can't wait to get into all of that. I'm going to save that because I do
Yeah.
want to talk about before we get into that, the connection that you've seen with grief and mental health. And I know we've talked about grief as far as like loss and death, but like what about
Mhm.
all the other areas of grief that
Mm.
people don't maybe identify as grieving, but it actually is?
Yeah, I mean, the list is really endless. And I think, someone who really speaks on this beautifully is Claire Bidwell. She has this book called Conscious Grieving. And I think it's a really beautiful way to understand like a stepping stone, a starting point, right? Of like, what does that even mean? It's like you mentioned beautifully, an example, job loss, breakup, divorce, friendship changes through seasons, moving. I even brought back to, and she sort of speaks to this, Claire, as well, too, is like school. When you really love your teacher and have that attachment when you're
Mm,
younger, they're the first safe place for so many people. And then you're switching teachers. I'm looking at this little picture of me even while we're chatting, and it's like I remember that feeling of when I was in third grade and I loved my teacher so much and had to move on. It's like those little things that it just it happens so much in your life of moving houses, of changing states, of, I mean, I really just could go on and on of like,
Mm,
that's grief, but we just don't
yeah.
want to name it because we're so quick to compare always in life, but especially like, well, no, no, they lost their mom.
Mm,
That's grief. This isn't grief.
mhm,
No, yes, it
mm,
is. Own it for yourself. Like,
mhm,
show up for yourself, hold that space for yourself. It's like such a starting point to be like, I am grieving. And like,
mhm,
this is my version of grief. And like, that's just, as important and not even comparable to other person's grief because grief is unique and individual, just as we all are.
mm.
So,
I'm
yeah.
so glad you said that, because I remember when I had a miscarriage, and that was really what really tapped me into this emotion of grief, not realizing I've had all these other grievance like moments, micro griefs and other things in my life, but this was really the most intimate um of comparing, of,
Yeah.
I didn't really have, like, I didn't have a baby. This person lost their baby in a stillbirth, or this happened, or this,
Yeah.
and it completely, um, it diminishes your experience. And
Hmm.
it really is one of those things where it's so, you don't even realize you're doing it. And do you think that it's a way that we try to protect
I was
ourselves?
just gonna say that. I think we're just getting right back into that protection of like,
Yeah.
oh no, no, they have it worse. It's fine. I'm actually fine. Everything's fine. I'm gonna get through this. Where it's like, it's okay to like own that and sit with someone even side by side. We're not comparing. We're just holding space for each other within our own versions of that. And so I love that that came to mind for you because I very much believe of like we're just looking for ways to get out of the uncomfortable again and
Mhm.
again
Like
and
crawling
again.
out of it.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
with mental health, I think something that really just hit me like square in the face was also sort of like coping mechanisms. I think as always with the mental health, we sort of talk about that. But I think especially like ones that dress differently, like right, they just keep showing up in your life, but they're like, no, they're this color and then they're this. And for me, it was just
Mhm.
working 3 jobs. It was just being as busy as possible. I was working for really large name companies. I worked for Red Bull for some time in their marketing team, endless budget, endless dreams, endless goals, right? Like there's just
Mhm.
endless things that you
Sky's the
could sort of,
limit.
yeah, like let's go. And I just had this moment of when I was like, what is the end goal? Like I got my running shoes on and I'm running as fast as I can into building other people's dreams and visions and so many other things. But like, where am I expecting to meet myself on the other side? And I just had this like visual for myself drop in of like, I'm not a runner and I'm not athletic. I went to beauty school, but I think of like almost when you're running and all of a sudden you realize like, oh my gosh, I'm really like far away from home, right? Of like yourself. And you know that the walk back, because you exerted all that energy, is going to be that much harder when you're swinging back on the other side of that. And that's when you need
Mhm.
the tools. That's when you need the like to slow down and check in with yourself and come back home to yourself, if you will. And so I always sort of think of that of like, yes, it's going to be hard because you exerted all that energy trying to run away from it. But like, what can you do to lean into it that it is hard? Who can you call in? Who can you ask for support? What new things can you try? Like, healing is such exploration. It's not checklist. It's not to do. And I think with
Mhm.
mental health too, we just want to be fed the fastest recipe for
Make me
healing
better.
it. Yeah, because it's so hard. And sometimes it like truly doesn't feel that you ever will get out of it. And I have so been there where I was like, I just think this is my life. Like this is just my
Mhm.
story. I'm never
Mhm.
gonna feel happy again. I'm never gonna feel that hope again. And I share the story of when I was sort of in group therapy in the thick of it, is that I remember the first time I like literally saw like the color of the trees again. Like I was like driving home and I was like, huh, are these trees like always this colorful? And it just, you start to have those small glimpses of hope come in that don't have to be anything grand, but they can mean everything when you look back and sort of your journey. So I think you said it perfectly. There is so much grief within mental health of even like say all of a sudden you're going through different episodes or different things that have made you have depression or sort of come into anxiety or any of those things too. Is you're also grieving of like that normal quote unquote life you felt before that and wanting to get back to it, but not understanding that sometimes you don't get back to it. You integrate this new version and these new things that have happened to you and supporting this version of you. So
So good. There's so many different things that you shared, and Oh my gosh, I want to talk about all of the things. What would you say to someone that is kind of that is in that reality right now of like, this is just how I'm going to feel forever?
Mm,
Just kind of in the thick of it, whether that's a loss of a relationship or a job, or maybe it's a relationship and a job all at the same time. Cause sometimes like that saying, when it rains, it pours.
yeah.
It's so interesting. It's like when you're already down, sometimes something else
Oh,
happens and then you're just sitting there like, what is going on?
yeah.
Why is this happening? This is how I'm going to be for the rest of my life. What do you say to those people?
I think it's really asking, it's sort of reflecting back to them of like what they need right now. Because I think sometimes it's like one thing I really sort of champion is asking someone, like, do you need help or support to be heard or to be hugged? Because I think immediately when meeting someone with, advice or the fixing, sometimes people totally want that where they're like, I can't see up from down. And like you said, I just lost my job. I don't even know where to start. My resume is outdated. Like, I need help. I need support. Can you jump in? Or it's like, I just need to be heard. I need to be witnessed in this pain. I need to sit within myself and verbal process this. Or like, I just need that connection. I need to feel hugged. I need to feel safe. I need to feel supported. And like that someone has me and I don't need to have perfect answers for them and they don't need to have the perfect answers for me. So I think when sitting within that is like really trying to tap into what you need in the smallest of ways and understanding like even what feels small to me. A shower and getting out of bed was the biggest accomplishment like during that time. And I know
Mm.
sort of people sort of speak to that like, in memes on social media, like if you showered today, like when you're in it, high five. But that's what I really hope within storytelling is like really dive into finding those things, to finding those people that make you realize that there is hope and they give you an example and proof that it exists, that like you will make it out of this. And what are the ways, and again, the exploration of things that work for you because it isn't a one size fits all. But yeah,
Mhm.
look for the proof, look for the people. And if you can't find them, like that's what I hope Sunday mornings is for so many people, is that connection to resources and people along the way too. So
Yeah, I love that.
yeah.
And I think, yeah, like finding what works for you. Cause like one person can tell you, this is how I got through it. And you might find it helpful, but if it might not resonate. And I think
Yeah.
having, resources and different things to test and try, and knowing that you're not in it alone,
Hmm.
because when you're going through a loss, whatever type of loss it is, it can feel so isolating.
Yeah.
Even if it's a loss within like your identity, which is very abstract, even that feels really isolating because you're just like, no one understands me. No one knows,
Yeah.
what I'm going through. And it just feels very lonely.
Yeah. And I think that is like, thank you for saying that because I think it's something that's not acknowledged enough is like grief is an isolating experience. And my sort of view on it is like it's sort of meant to be in some ways. I think it's very much meant to be supported within community with other people. But like you said, I think sometimes we're really looking and being fed so much information that like you really need to be able to like sit and digest like how does this land for me? Like what does this look like in my life? How does this differ? I think sort of goes back to like finding the right therapist, right? Like what
Mhm.
feels right for you versus like just drowning yourself in again what could be a distraction of okay, I'm going to
Mhm.
book 17 different workout classes and try
Mhm.
all these different ceremonies or women's circles or meetups or whatever it may be. It's like also just sort of being able to sit in that isolation, quote unquote, what I sort of like to reframe as like the stillness of yourself, of like also
Mhm.
coming back home to it, what matters to you and how your life is going to look like after this because it matters what your life is going to look like after this. Of course, your
Mhm.
friends and family and loved ones might also have to get to know you a little bit. So, like,
Mhm.
encouraging them to do so along the way and checking in and being like, you know what, I don't really know how I feel about that right now, but I'll let you know as soon as I do. And giving you both that permission to be like, I'm still trying to figure out what this means for my life after this.
Mhm.
So,
And not having to have an answer for it or feel like have
yeah,
it all together, all figured out. Because that
yeah.
is something with grief that I have found. It's like your world essentially stops,
Hmm.
but the rest of the world is just going along as
Hmm.
it would. And it's a very interesting. feel like it's such an interesting feeling and experience
Yeah.
because you almost just want everything to stop. Like you want all the people that you're talking, like everybody's life you think should be different, but it's not. It's like trying to make sense of it. And so, like you said, it is a very like personal experience and it's meant to be that way because it's like
Mhm.
your world has changed in whatever capacity that is. And I think giving yourself that space to honor it is just a part of that journey. So with mental health, do you find that people that have a hard time accepting the grief or being with it or having, the space to process it, is that what you find leads to more mental health challenges?
Totally. I think it's like from the start, we're just fed so much information. It is like brain overload, especially like
Totally.
when you think of your actual brain within grief, right? Like you're talking about, there is actually literally physiologically things that start changing in your brain.
Mhm.
And so, especially when you're like, I'm just looking for not even the answers, I'm just looking for like where to start. I'm overwhelmed within that. I think it starts with just like mental health, I think for a really long time. And should paraphrase or sort of go back to I actually went to school for counseling with a specialty in substance abuse. So I'm all in like the brains and
Mhm.
neuroscience and just information sort of within that. But within mental health and grief, we're fed misinformation. Like within the stages of grief, I'm gonna like probably change some people's lives, but this it's not intended for the person who is grieving. It actually originally was not intended for the person that was grieving.
Mhm.
The original intention was for the person that was actually, for this case, dying. And
Mhm.
so, step one, the thing that I see most in like mainstream sort of media surrounding grief is sort of already sharing misinformation about it. So, we're just off on the back foot to begin with.
Right. We already don't understand it.
Yeah, yeah, and so I think, again, we're looking for that, like, "Okay, 5 stages. Yep, I'm angry. Check. Okay, I got that.
Mhm.
Like,
Okay,
I'm on the
okay, now
right
I'm in
path," you
anger.
know?
I'm in the right phase.
Yes, yeah.
That's
So,
so interesting.
yeah, I think they go hand in hand because I again, like I mentioned, so much within that and within mental health is identity. And I think really pairs beautifully with that is grief and understanding like, okay, this has changed about me, or this situation in my life has happened, or these things coupled together, or I've realized like I didn't even know what anxiety was. I thought this was how everyone felt, or so many stories for myself and that I've heard from loved ones about that. And so I think they don't exist without each other. They exist sort of coexist within themselves. So
That seems to be the common theme with grief is there's a lot of
yeah.
coexistence.
Hmm.
There's just these like two opposite sides and you're kind of just like in the middle of it.
Yeah.
So, oh, what was the question that came up for me as you were talking about it? So, I definitely want to talk about what to say and what not to say. And
Hmm.
obviously it like depends on like what people are grieving. And then I want to talk about, what like what you can do and get a little bit deeper into that. But the question, what was the question? I should have wrote it
Like, I
down
don't
because
know, the
as we
coexistence is just
the coexistence of like living in that right now. Oh, I know what the
yeah.
question was. So I want to talk about the type of grief of like, I'll speak specifically to me with my dad. Um, my dad was a part of my life, but not really. Parents divorced. He wasn't really present. And then he died a couple of years ago. It was last year. Yeah, it was last year. And he was older. And it's like that experience with grief was so interesting because it's like
Mm-hmm.
at one like I must have grieved the relationship that I thought I would have with the dad or the
Mm-hmm.
relationship that we did have or didn't have. And then when he passed away, it was such a I thought it was such an interesting I can't even really speak like put words to it because it was such an interesting experience and it still kind of continues to be an interesting
Yeah.
experience. So my question is like how do you work through that with people that have lost something or someone that they already didn't have a relationship with but at one point they did, and that could be like for my example is dad, but that could be like a whole different host of things too.
Yeah, and first off, I should say, like, I so resonate with a lot of that because I think there are different people in my life and different relationships where I was grieving not even having the relationship, step one, and then this
Mhm.
version of like, I think especially when it's a parent, it's like, you're fed a lot of that, or different things come up with Father's Day or their birthday, or things that just really have it blaring in your face a little bit of like what could have been. And I think that is a really hard thing to grieve, of like what could have been. The unknown is really hard to grieve as well too. And so one thing that I'd sort of recommend within that is, because it can be really, really hard or challenging to find the words, is when I was working with Hospice of the Valley, we'd work with art a lot. And not, a lot of people immediately maybe tune me out and are like, I'm not an artist, like that's not for me. But it can be as something as simple as like getting scraps of fabric. I'm just thinking of this one instance that came up with this little boy, and I would work with 5, 6, and 7, and then I worked with 7, 8, and 9 year olds. And again, someone who's sort of had those relationships or are grieving already, sort of like the not being able to have those relationships. And we bring up the scraps of fabric, and I just have them pick one that made that person resonate with them, and just sort of go into the fabric and talk about the fabric. And I think when you sort of place it onto something else, it can be easier to find the words versus attaching to this person that you also like, speaking for myself, I'm still a little protective of, even though, probably doesn't have the right to be protective over my father, but like of who I am and who built me, or, I don't even know much about him. So it's like all I have really to go off of are photographs and like a little bit of memories here and there. And I think so, really leaning into the things that you don't have to have the words for. Somatic movement has also been really helpful for me, of just like feeling what it feels like in my body, and then slowly starting to do the classic. I think, a lot of times like writing a letter to them maybe be helpful. But what I did is I'd write a letter to myself of like what I would have told my dad in the stages of my life, of like, here's what's going on with me. I'm really sad that you are missing that. Or here's what, came up for me, and a new pattern that I saw with myself. And I'm really wondering if it's because of you that I'm this way. Because I think sometimes writing with them can get really personal, or again, you're looking for the words, but when you're just sort of talking to yourself and maybe recording a voice memo to yourself, to really like hear those words come out of you and like sit with them, feel them in your throat, say their name. Maybe that's something you also don't really get to do. I can't, dad is not even in my vocabulary, it hasn't been
Mm.
really since I was really young. So those are just like the starting stepping stools of just like talking to yourself about the questions that you have, if you aren't able to ask them, can be really, I think, really powerful.
I love that so much. And I think, speaking to your point of how you kind of just have to figure out what works for you, and like how there are all these different ways to express grief, connect with grief, which ultimately connects you to a part of yourself.
Mhm.
So I want to talk about things to say and things
Mm.
not to say, because I'm
Yeah.
like, one of my profound grief experiences that really transformed my world was my husband's mom passing, like shortly after us starting to date. And after, I mean, it could have gone one or two ways, could have pushed me out, which rightly so, like going through this like complete, world is turned upside down. Starting to date this new girl, like, no, don't have time for this. Or he could have brought me in, and he brought me in, which was like the best thing for our relationship. But I just remembered feeling so uncomfortable and so afraid of saying the wrong thing, because I'm like, I don't really know this family yet. Like, we literally had been only dating for a couple months. And it was very interesting because it was such a transformative experience for me to just be able to not say anything and just
Mm.
be there and just be a present body with him and his family and get to know them on a very deep level. And it's really connected us in so many ways. But I do remember being like, what do I say, what do I not say? Like, it was like I was like so in my head about it. And obviously, like, through experience now I have a better understanding, but for someone that maybe doesn't have that experience and isn't sure what to say and what not to say. I mean, I started a list when I had my miscarriage of like unhelpful things. Do not say this to someone that has had a miscarriage. one of those things being, well, at least you know you can get pregnant. I was like, don't say that. You don't.
Ooh.
And
Yeah.
obviously it's like, you know, different types of loss and different words that you would say. But I'm just curious if you kind of have a list or things in general that are like, maybe don't go that way. And also the other ones,
Yeah.
everything happens for a reason.
Oh, yeah, that was mine was you're so young. That's what I got. Oh, don't worry, you have the rest of your life ahead of you. You're so young. You're so young. I'm like, if one more person tells me I'm so young, I know I'm young. Like,
Like, thank you for calling it
yeah,
out.
literally. Oh gosh, such a good question. I think it is one that people want to know, right? I think it's one of the most common things I'm asked of like
Mhm.
this happened. Like what would you suggest? What are my next like best steps? And I think it really is going back to like a quote, I guess I should say, that has guided me my whole life by Maya Angelou is people forget what you said and what you did, but never how you made them feel.
Mhm.
And just sitting with someone within that, I think literally asking them like how, what is coming up for you? What are things that would be helpful? Do you want to say their name? You can sort of follow their lead, right? But I think it's like acting like there's an elephant in the room and not saying anything. The silence is like deafening. And I think, like you said, there are also things that come up where it's like, ooh, don't know if that would have been like my first choice to have someone
Mhm.
say to me. But I think it's also a time that shouldn't necessarily fall on us, but it's a great time for education. I think it's like
Mhm.
a community effort to have people sort of understand, and because it is so unique to each person, is like, hey, it's really important to me. My mom's name is Perry and her birthday is March 22nd. It's really, really important to me that people around me remember that because I want to celebrate her on that day.
Mhm.
Or not looking to just sort of fill the silence with like what makes you comfortable in that conversation and what is
Mhm.
going to make them comfortable. And maybe it is. And I, sort of held space in hospice again, sort of going back to that, I think is a really beautiful example of some of the house rules of hospice that I still carry into my life today is it's okay to laugh, it's okay to cry, it's okay to pass, but also never pass the tissues because passing the tissues in hospice is sort of like this unconscious message of when you're sitting with them, like that's enough now. Like we're done with that emotion. So I'm going to pass you the tissues. So you, even though that's maybe not the intention, but so you can sort of like, we can wrap this up and we can like clean up the uncomfortableness of the crying.
Wow.
So, yeah. So to answer your question, I think like it is so unique. And I know that that's not necessarily the most helpful way to go about it, but follow their lead. Like be curious, ask questions. Don't be afraid to say the wrong thing. Grief is going to a lot of times bring up really uncomfortable conversations, but just own that. Be like, you know what? I actually really don't know what to say. So I'd
Mhm.
love to just sit with you and so beautifully, like you did with your husband, of like, I just love to learn and I'd love to hear stories about them, or I'd love to hear about
Mhm.
this job that you lost or this vision that you had for yourself before this miscarriage and how you're feeling with your own body. Like, what is that bringing up for you? And just asking those, again, just being curious and
Mm.
remembering, like, how am I making them feel in this morning, in this moment, not how do I feel
Mm.
this
Oh my
moment.
God, what a beautiful answer. And it's so, that's so spot on. And it
Yeah.
is like with anything, it's like holding that space is I think that's what I've learned through all of this and my own experiences. Like that's truly what I think people do remember because of how it makes them feel, because it makes them feel seen through the pain that they're experiencing. And I love that, like check in with yourself
Yeah.
of,
Ooh, the ego comes to
yeah,
play
it's
when it
like, how
comes
do I
with
like, oh,
grief.
this made me so uncomfortable. And I noticed that too, of like the
Mhm.
discomfort that I was experiencing. Like people kind of like like there's certain people in my life that like stayed away from me because they are so used to me being like the happy, like, you know, person. And like to see me not that way was really
Yeah.
uncomfortable for them. And they didn't know how to support me, which is no fault to them because I can relate to that because I've been on the other side. But I love like just the common theme that I'm noticing in our conversation is like just like the asking the questions, being curious, and then just
Mhm.
I love the question of like, what do you need right now? Like, do you want someone to hold you? Do you want do you want to vent? Do you want support? Do you need advice? Like, I love like that check in because like that can just alone help someone be like, you know what? I just need a hug right now, or I just need
Totally.
someone to hug me and say like it's going to be okay. And like that like is them expressing it so then you can give that back, because I think at the end of the day we do have really good intentions and we do just want to help people, and we end up staying away from it because we're afraid of saying the wrong thing or upsetting someone further. in whatever loss that they're experiencing. Um, and I think, with toxic positivity and spiritual bypassing and, all of those coping strategies, those are coping strategies for the person that's like there with you. Like, it's not about, you're not making it about yourself. You're not making it about
Yeah.
them. You're making it about yourself. So it's just such a fascinating thing that I've learned so much through my own experience, and I'm continuing. And I love getting to learn from you, Natalie. It's just, you have such an eloquent way of expressing it and explaining these really difficult, tough conversations. So I do want to ask you, I want to know about the gifting. And I also want to know,
Mhm.
like, you gave some really great examples of like what are some things, like the question of like what do you need is so well intended, but again, when you're
Mhm.
going through a loss of any kind, you have no idea what you need. You're like, I need things not to fall apart. Like, your answers are not going to be something that actually like soothes you in that moment. um so what are some things that you have found to be so impactful for people, of like different acts of kindness or different things that you can do that don't require the other person to tell you what they need?
Yeah, and first off, just want to echo so much of like, I think a really important question to ask yourself as someone who's supporting someone through their grief is like, how do I see that this grief, or how do I feel that this grief is inconveniencing me? How
Mm,
is this friend no longer the friend that can be? This sunshine, rainbows, I vibe off of their energy. I feed off
mhm.
their energy. Ooh, now they don't have it. Like, they're the person that I know I can invite to the dinner, and they're going to like command the room and be this, bright light. And that's so much what I've seen reflected in sort of your personal brand and from what I've experienced of that online. But I also so much want to say, like, your heart is what is I want people to really think of like, hey, this person has done so much for me. Not that it's like a give and take of like, okay, now I need to like show up because they did this. Like, that's love, is
Mhm.
like showing up for that person, even if it feels, a little bit inconvenient because it's surrounding dates to you that are really important. I was chatting with a dear friend where she lost one of her very, very close family members that she saw as a mother during one of her best friend's weddings, literally the weekend of.
Mm.
And it's like, yes, they're competing, right? It's, you want to be there, you want to show up for your best friend. It's one of the most special days of their entire life. And but one of the two times in life that we actually only gather around people are during their wedding and during their funeral. Like, let's
Hear about
show
that
up in the
all
in
the
between.
time, right?
Like, so, but thank you for sort of just bringing that up, because I think it's so important to like ask ourselves these
Mhm.
questions. And like you said,
Mm.
even if someone, myself, I ask myself that all the time too. And it's, I don't have all the answers, right? I'm not just like sitting here chilling with all the answers with grief. It's a constant practice. It's a constant, paying attention to how it's changing and evolving for that person. But to sort of how to show up, right? I think their beautiful thing is when the person doesn't have to think about it. So it's giving those examples. I have sort of on social media, and one of the posts that people love are like, what are 10 ways to say, 10 other ways to say, rather than I'm sorry for your loss.
Mm.
It's, how often do we hear that seeing over and over on the post, because it's just what we've sort of been built to say or
Mhm.
created to say. And so I think it's something as even so small as like, how do you show up, is like being that different, that breath of fresh air within the same
Mhm.
sentence that you're just seeing over and over from people. And I think it's best intentions, but even just saying like, you are so surrounded in love within your grief, call it out. No, I'm so
Mhm.
sorry for your loss. It's like, you are grieving and I see
Mhm.
you and my love surrounds you. And like, I am going to be here for you. And so starting small of sort of even those little things of just changing even like how we're literally sharing how we're showing up for people. And then just sort of private, as I mentioned, is like giving examples. I'd love to pick up your kids from school. Is that something I can do for you? What appointments do you have coming up that I can cancel for you? Because I think that's another big thing, right? When you're a busy person and have your
Mhm.
schedule stacked and you have all these different appointments, or bringing over dinner, but not asking what, saying, hey, I can bring it over Thursday, or I can bring it over next Tuesday. I'm thinking Italian or Mexican food. Let me know if that works for you. If not, I'll leave it at the door. Like, still offering that, because sometimes not necessarily wanting to be around people is important too. So
Mhm.
But I think besides that is really just for me and a lot of the backbone of what Sunday mornings is people show up, I would say, so strong within the first few weeks, maybe even month or so.
Mhm.
That is when you don't even know up from down. It is so
Mhm.
important, don't get me
Mhm.
wrong, but when the grief I've seen so often happens is month 3, month
Mhm.
6, or
Mhm.
year 1, like those death
Mhm.
anniversaries, those dates. And again, we're talking grief of loss of a loved one particularly, but also with job loss, also with
Totally.
pet loss, of moving, of oh my gosh, I loved being in this house in Halloween, and now that my new neighborhood just feels sad because of X,
Mhm.
thinking of those times and those dates that were important to them. And so that I think is another huge way to show up, is just adding those into the calendar as soon as you know them, as soon as you find them, asking the questions again, sort of going back to being curious and showing up on those dates where I think as like a society, we haven't really been taught how deeply important they matter, and how those can feel more isolating than even like the dates you maybe think would be isolating for the person.
Totally.
So,
Oh, so good, because it is so true. Like people like pour into you those first like
mhm.
month or two, and then it starts to teeter off. I have this one client that just comes to mind with like loss that she's experiencing. And like she had a friend say to her that like she needs to get over it already.
Yeah, it's pretty
and
common, unfortunately.
and like, those words, like, depending on, how it's delivered and all of that, but like that feels like so detrimental to someone's like mental and emotional like well-being, to like I feel like there's a timeline on what you're grieving, whether it's a relationship, a job, a person, a pet, location, self. Like how do you speak to that? And
Yeah.
really like, if you're on the receiving end of it, how do you how would you recommend someone responds to that?
I would say, like, I know your intentions are really sweet. I know your heart, but that actually is, I'm not ever actually going to get over it. And I'd love to teach you how we can like build this new life where it's integrated into my life and like our relationship, because I think it's really important you understand now I'm not going to.
Mm.
And I know that's maybe really uncomfortable, or, depend on the relationship and how well you know them. But I think it's in owning that, like, I'm not going to. You don't ever get over grief. Like, fun fact, spoiler alert, like PSA,
Yes.
scream from
It's not a part of
mountains.
you.
Like, it really is that integration. It really is like, how do I now coexist with this life that also has this, what feels like this whole? And immediately when you said that, it brought me up to, did you ever see the movie, or maybe on social media, A Good Grief, with, I forget the guy's name, but from Schitt's Creek? And I was like,
Mm.
yes, like, oh my gosh, we're having like a mainstream Netflix movie with like a big star on Netflix. And don't get me wrong, I definitely loved a lot of the movie, but something that made me so saddened to see is he gets out of this relationship, and immediately his friends start encouraging him to get on dating apps, which I feel was obviously supportive in nature, but you could tell he wasn't necessarily ready in that time. And I
Mhm.
think it is. We're just like, oh, I just want you to be back to like who you were. Like,
Mhm.
I want us to be like out running through the streets, eating dinner, like
Mhm.
working. I think in work environments, it's another thing. We need you to be producing. We need you to be like that sharp mind that you were before. That's also what I've seen. And that's a whole nother episode of bereavement leave that
Oh
I
my
could go on
god.
forever about. But it is that of like, I think just understanding that the grief is never gone. And that is
Mhm.
something that like I say over and over, because it's really hard to understand, because the grief is so painful. All you can think is like, this level of pain is going to exist forever. Absolutely
Mhm.
not. I'm done.
Mhm.
Count me out. It's
Mhm.
like, no, it won't necessarily be this way forever, but it's not going to go away. And so as
No.
soon as sort of everyone around you sort of sees and understands that and champions that, I think is really important. And I just had this conversation this morning actually with a girlfriend when we were going on a walk, of breakups. I think that's another thing that, again, it's so much easier to direct that anger of like, you
Mhm.
deserve better than them. Like, yeah, on to the next.
Totally.
It's like, there's love there. Like, ask
Mhm.
yourself again, is that helpful? Ask them, like, what do you feel about this? Like, I'm so down to be rally and like be mad with you, but like there was love there. And like
Mhm.
it's also okay to just sit in the sadness. And it's so much easier to be like, yeah, angry rally friend group than it is to just be like, let's talk about how like you're missing them and like the
Mhm.
times that maybe I could show up for you, or she has children, and I'm like, are there things coming up with them that I could go to with them? Do they have a
Mhm.
soccer game or something that I could attend that this partner would have gone with before? And really just getting, again, asking yourself, like, where do I see that I feel this is inconveniencing my life enough that I'm going to ask, when are you going to get over this?
Mhm. So that question is like, that will stick with me forever
Oh,
because it
yeah,
is. It's
it's
like that
happened.
check-in of like, oh, like this is inconveniencing me. This is now making it about me and it's not
Yeah.
about you. And my intentions are well, but such a good question. Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
Natalie, this has just been amazing. And you have such great wisdom and insights. And that's why your platform is growing and it's so beautiful. And so anyone that's listening, make sure that you follow Natalie right now. If you don't, especially if you feel more grief avoidant, it's nothing to avoid. It's something to fully open and embrace because it does fundamentally change us. And it's, what causes the pain in my own experience is not the grief itself, it's the resistance to it. It's the thoughts of this shouldn't be this way, this shouldn't be happening to me, and it's resisting the reality of the pain of the loss, and that's what makes it. That's the suffering. That's what I always say. I'm like, pain
Mm,
is inevitable, suffering is optional, and we suffer because we're resisting the reality of whatever it is that we're grieving. And as soon as we can accept that reality, and we don't have to love it, you have to get cozy with it and be like, yay, this is all happening for like, no, it doesn't have to be like that, but you can accept that it's happening. Then it won't, then the fear of it being this painful experience for the rest of your life, it starts to dissipate. It doesn't stay like, there are moments where like you're like totally fine and the next moment you're not. And that's just how the emotion works. But it isn't like not being afraid of the emotion is really what I have found that has transformed my life and has also opened me up to being a more empathetic, connected person. Like I think that's what is so powerful. I interviewed this woman earlier today about like why bad things happen to good people. And I think it's like within the grief of like being able to connect with people on a human to human level, because I don't think there's a single person in the world that hasn't experienced some sort of loss on some level.
mm,
And this is what creates this common shared humanity. It's not our happiness and our success. That's what makes people feel further apart. Is
yeah.
that what brings people closer together is truly this emotion, is this experience that's very much a part of the human experience. So thank you for everything that you're doing. This is such beautiful work. I do want to talk about your crowdfunding campaign. Share a
Yes.
little bit about what
Yeah.
you're doing, what we're raising money for, because I'm in.
Yeah, oh my gosh, and thank you, and I just wanna echo so much of, like, it's been such an honor to chat with you because you're someone who I see your heart, like, we've never, even necessarily had the chance to chat to in depth this depth before, right? Because I
Mhm.
think that's also, like, it takes a special and unique, human on the other end to have these conversations, so I thank you so much for having me and sharing this, and I think you're just so right, is, like, grief is inevitable, so why
Mhm.
do like, we gotta talk about it now.
We gotta talk about it.
We gotta talk about it. It's 1 in 8 children by the time they're 18 will lose a caretaker, parent, sibling, someone close to them. Like, this is our reality, and not to be doom and gloom, but, like, we're in that reality. Like, the more we
Mhm.
avoid it, the more we don't talk about it, we're shaping our future literally right now.
Mhm.
So, with Sunday Mornings, the crowdfunding campaign that I'm so excited to share about is that it's changing the cultural messaging surrounding grief through heartfelt gifting. So there are gift boxes that you can send during those times,
Mm.
not just during the first week, not
Oh,
just
I
during the
love
first
that.
month. Um, Really inspired by my own story of that I had endless rooms of flowers, right?
Oh
Going back
God,
to
I was
the
just gonna bring that up. I was like, do not
Yeah.
send flowers because I don't want
Yes.
something to take care of. The amount of flowers. Oh, I'm so glad
Yes.
you brought
And
that up.
they die. Let's
They
call it
die and then
out.
they die and then oh my gosh, I'm so glad you brought that up because when I saw about the gift, the heartfelt gifting, I was like, this is genius, because the instinct is to send flowers, which again is so well intended, but that's not what someone that's experiencing whatever degree of loss wants. They don't want to take care of something.
Yeah.
They can barely take care of themselves in that moment, let alone a plant.
Exactly. Gosh, say it louder. Like, that's how
I
this whole
could.
thing came from,
I could.
is Sunday morning. So a little bit of play on that is actually sort of related to like Sunday scaries when I felt the most alone when I was younger. I was
Mhm.
on the weekends. It's this, you know, so deep idea of like, what does it mean to start over and have it be Monday, all the way to like mornings of where I typically felt a lot of that through the
Mhm.
weekend, right? Of when you are feeling that
Totally.
alone time, to then I'm staring at this room full of dead flowers, which
Mhm.
again, I'm so with you that the intention is there, the heartfelt connection is there, but I'm gonna call out a couple people some maybe right now. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's a checklist of like, oh, send
Uh,
them the flowers, they'll know that I'm thinking of
Total,
them.
a thousand percent. I
Yeah.
agree that it's like a checklist. Like, what's my perception? How can I show
Yes.
up for this person? Like, it's performative. That's the word.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's okay. If that's you, it's okay.
Yeah,
These conversations are really just meant to like spark something within yourself and maybe
totally.
think a little bit differently. Cause we've all been there. We've all been there in performative
100%.
action. No one is like saint and holy with it. Like, I think it's all relatable, but I'm glad that you did say that because it's so
Yeah.
true.
And I will say, call out, "Hi, present," right? Like, I've
Right.
also been that person, and so
Totally.
it's learning from that experience of like, okay, what are the things that are going to be with them long term? What are the rituals? What are the different things that have been helpful during my research of times that I've spent with hospice, or just chatting with people within the community of like, what do you feel like would have been helpful and supportive? I'm really proud to say that the products that are going in are small business owned. So you're also giving back to that community. Fun fact, I grew up in Portland, Oregon. My grandfather was a ceramic artist. I'm all for artists and giving back to the community within that way. So, yeah, and it's this box that it's your safe place to come back into your grief. It's sort of, I hope it can be this portal that when you open it, you're ready to have those big feelings, maybe in small pockets, or maybe just really diving back into that. But it's this place where you could put keepsakes and cards and photos and things that feel important, and the design just, you open it and you feel like it's that warm hug maybe that you need. And it is the asking you that question, what do you need? Do you
Mhm.
need to feel supported? Maybe some of the products and that can help bring that out for you. Do you need to feel heard? Okay, maybe there's some things that make you feel really loved because I listened, that your mother's favorite flower was X, and now this is inside of the box. And so it's that example that you were heard and you were listened to maybe you just need to feel hugged and have that warm, cozy feeling of having someone support you. So yeah, there's more information on the Instagram on Sunday mornings. And also we'll share the link, but doing
Yes.
it through iFund Women, because I'm all for badass women doing badass
Yes.
things.
Same here.
And
That's my job.
yes, yes. And so excited to share it with you all. If you feel called to support, I say it isn't just monetary donations. It really is just starting that conversation now and bringing that awareness now, of sharing it with someone as maybe that conversation starter, of maybe
Mhm.
that, like, hey, we've sort of avoiding this awkward elephant in the room, but like, this is my olive branch. This is my time to sort of start that with you. And I hope to be that. I hope that Sunday mornings is bridging that gap. It's so much more of like building that connection of, okay, how can we talk about what's in the box too? What are the, maybe that it's this beautiful, journal. And now when I use it, maybe I can take a photo of it and send it back to you. It starts this love language of that.
Mhm.
You don't have to have the words to say, thank you so much for the beautiful flowers. I'm so
Mhm.
like this long, lengthy text, right? That again is sort of performative of like, I received them, thank you. And then let me know if you need anything, and the conversation disappears. It's like
Mhm.
this box is intended to stay with you and with your loved one and build those connections. So
Mm. And it goes back to the
yeah.
Maya Angelou quote of like, people forget what
Yes.
what you say, but not how it makes you feel. It just
Yeah.
makes me think of one of my girlfriends that just had a baby, and it was rough labor. Baby's healthy, she's healthy, everything is great, but like it was up and down. And I signed up for the meal train and was obviously checking in, and we got their meal the first day, the first night home, and she texted me and my husband and was like, I will never forget this. And it's like,
Mm,
that's that reminder, it's like,
mhm.
to me, I was just like, it was like, I want to make sure they have food because I've been
Yeah.
like, I've been there. I know how like that first night home is such a whirlwind. So I was like, but I didn't, you don't think about like what an impact that'll make of like being home first night with your baby after being in the hospital for 6 days and being able to have that meal, and like those are those little things that just like, oh
100%.
my gosh, that's like 100% how it makes them feel. So I love what you're
Yeah.
doing. I love this heartfelt gifting. I will make sure that's in the show notes so anyone that feels called can support this, because it needs to be out there. We need access. to these
Yeah.
conversations. And again, if you're not following Natalie, make sure you do because she's a phenomenal resource. I've learned so much just through her content of how to have these conversations, different ways, how to say, I'm sorry for your loss. Cause again, so guilty. It's like we're so programmed for it.
Yeah.
And it just takes
Yeah.
awareness, no judgment on
Totally.
yourself. If you're like judging yourself and being like, I've been a terrible friend, please don't judge yourself. I've been there. I remember after I had my miscarriage, I like texted one of my best friends who had one a couple years before, and I was like, I am so sorry. I was a terrible friend. Like I had no idea how to show up for you. And she was so, she like it brought on such a great conversation. But I was like, oh my gosh, like I cannot believe how insensitive, like just so many different things that I learned through my own experience. So like don't judge yourself, learn from it. It's like if
Yeah.
this is sparking something within you, no judgment, but you can actually like really learn how to show up and be that person that you want to be. Cause that's, I do believe we do have those kind intentions and sometimes they just go about the wrong way or it's just misunderstood or wrong delivery. But anyway, thank you, Natalie, so much for
Thank
this
you.
conversation and your time in this space. It was just so beautiful. I'm looking forward to continuing to learn from you and thank you for this work because it is so important.
Thank you for having me. It's been, like I said, the truest honor. And I just hoped that I can, be that person and be that resource for people that I wished I had. And we're all learning together. I just want to echo what you said of like not bringing that shame. Shame is a powerful emotion. That's not what Sunday mornings are. We're here to do. It's really just to ask yourself those questions and lean in. And so it's been an honor. I can't wait to continue connecting more and just thank you from the
Likewise.
bottom of my heart.